Hello, this is for my U.S. History 1 students. This should be a brief lecture. Today we're going to look at the 5 conditions that foster the American Revolution. And so I have them up here: the environment, the Enlightenment, self-government and salutary neglect, economic independence and unification. So let me go through all 5. But when you're taking notes on all 5, you want to also be able to refer back to your readings basically through weeks 1 through 4. And be able to reference your readings from weeks 1 through 4. And in doing so, you want to highlight what your understanding of the environment, the Enlightenment, self-government, economic independence, and unification. So, the first condition is what has been called the silent pressure of the environment, which helped create an American character and an atmosphere that was freer than what was going on in Europe. Europe was already fully developed, right? It already had social and political and economic institutions really defining what an individual could do within that environment. So things are going to transpire a little bit differently in British colonial America. So as discussed, the environment gave physical proof that all men should share certain basic political rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And we use men metaphorically, but back then they used it quite literally, so things definitely changed on that. This transition did not move at the same pace in every colony, and was influenced by the common denominator of social instability. In the earlier years of colonization, the unstable environment provided for a great deal of social mobility. But even more important, it also provided for a tremendous amount of anxiety in all colonists regardless of their social and economic positions. These anxieties were caused because the colonists faced an unsettled present and a thoroughly unpredictable future. This anxiety plus the opportunity for social mobility led to a tremendous amount of class conflict as men competed for nature's resources. And as was seen in the 1676 Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia. The common assumption during the formative or colonial period was that anyone with talent, regardless of background and origin, could attain a position of influence and power. However, as the relatively fluid social structure of the 17th and 18th centuries became immobile, so as the colonies are developing, the tensions mounted even more between the different classes as they were striving to protect what they had or to advance their economic and political power against a continually increasingly stingy environment, right? It's just getting more populated. Small planters held a reasonable hope of becoming large planters in the 1670s, but by the 1720s, this hope was diminishing rapidly in many of the colonies. So, the relatively fluid social structures of the late 17th century and the early 18th centuries became largely immobile by the mid-18th century. For example, during this period, colonial instability in Virginia was transformed into political instability. The desire for colonial political power was transformed into a triumph of provincial political power. With the stabilization of political power, the social structure became clearly defined, frozen at the bottom by the influx of slaves and frozen at the top by the final emergence of the provincial elite, who were not easily persuaded to accept new members into their exclusive circles. By 1763, in all the colonies, the pattern of provincial society had been set at the social structure had transplanted from England and was replaced by an indigenous provincial one that was relatively self-governing in nature. So they had their own social hierarchy in there, but there was also an expectation of hope an opportunity in the Americas that was not present in European societies, particularly in Britain, right? As these are British colonists coming over here in these first generations of colonial America. And so it's causing a degree of frustration, and because there's this false hope in many ways. So in your readings, go back to your readings and see if you can find an example of this increasingly stratified society as time is developing. The second condition was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, was the product of the writings of the liberal political philosophers of Europe and had a great impact on the minds of American intellectual leaders. It reinforced the practical experience of the American environment as it applied reason to authoritarian institutions and people. As discussed with the Declaration of Independence, as a result of the Enlightenment, men began to envision a universe based on impersonal scientific laws that govern the behavior of all matter. They lived in a universe which was controlled in all its manifestations by the laws of nature and of nature's God. So this is what would be described as deism too. This kind of political, spiritual understanding of phenomena and the laws that govern the world around us. They believed that the same laws which govern the movement of the stars in the heavens, of the tides in the oceans, also govern the tides of human history by directing the economic, political, social, and moral functions of life. They did not distinguish sharply between natural philosophy and moral philosophy. The men of the Enlightenment had almost unlimited confidence in reason and in the ability of man to penetrate the laws of nature with this reason, and in man's ability to apply them to the affairs of life. Right? So we're not going to rely on tradition, we're not going to rely on faith, we're not going to rely on doctrine, we're not going to rely on custom in order to organize our societies. We're going to rely on our own reason to organize our societies and governments, politics, culture, and whatnot. Is basically the argument of the enlightened thinkers. The revolution was justified in the minds of the colonial leaders by the appeal to reason as it had evolved out of the American colonial experience. The constitutions of the states and the new government under the Articles of Confederation were drawn up according to the principles of reason, and the Declaration of Independence used reason to justify the revolution. The Enlightenment gave the colonial leaders the theories to understand this revolutionary process that had been going through, and the confidence to proceed and know that they were right. Thus, the Europeans had created the ideas of the Enlightenment, while the American colonists had absorbed them during their colonial history, reflected on them, and institutionalized them, all within a very natural and unrestricted process called salutary neglect. And this gets us to our third basic aspect of another reason for the American Revolution, or a reason that fostered the American Revolution: salutary neglect, which we've gone over. So this is just a recap, and so in your readings with this recap, see if you can identify something from salutary neglect to explain its relationship to the Revolution. Self-government was not an American creation, that is, United States of American creation. It was the outgrowth of salutary neglect, as discussed earlier, and an invaluable legacy from England itself. As mentioned, in 1619, Jamestown received instructions from the Virginia Company to establish the first representative assembly in English America, the House of Burgesses. This example of self-government in the first English colony in America is an outstanding representation of the impact of the political developments within England during the 16th century and their direct relationship to English colonies. It would have been unthinkable for the Spanish kings in the 1500s to have permitted this degree of self-government within the Spanish settlements, when the Spanish colonials moved tentatively in the direction of limited self-government in the 1530s. The Spanish sovereign Charles I banned representative bodies in the New World. In contrast, the concept of limited power of the monarch was widely accepted in England, starting with the Magna Carta in 1215. By the beginning of the 17th century, the idea of basic rights and limited government was the product of the English mind and experience, which was transmitted to the English colonies in the form of self-government. The Magna Carta became a blueprint for the social and legal justice and established such ideas that no man could be judged without a trial by his peers, and his life or his property could not be taken away without such trial. Right? So this experience of salutary neglect leading to self-government has a long tradition in English society that is going to foster justification again for the American Revolution. The fourth condition of was economic independence. So as was the case with political independence, economic independence was also an evolutionary process. This was demonstrated when England was forced to shift its emphasis from regulation of trade, the Navigation Acts, the primary concern in the 17th century, to the regulation and manufacturing by use of the Trade Acts in the 18th century. Before a country can be politically independent, it has to be economically independent. By 1763, the colonists were basically economically independent, but were tied to the British Empire by economic benefits, customs, and habits. The last condition, and the spark that ignited the American War for Independence and led to the climax of the Revolution, was the new British imperial policy, which was implemented after 1763 and represented by the unification of the colonies, the reaction to British imposition of their authority to try to create revenue to pay for the war of 1763 and just to pay for the cost of having an empire. So this national unity begins to slowly develop, and I emphasize slowly, but it slowly begins to develop, and creating this very new concept of an American identity. The years preceding the American War for Independence concluded a giant cycle in which old world ideas became new world institutions as European ideas were absorbed in the American experience and transformed into new institutions to meet American needs. Thus, ideas and practices transplanted from old world to the new world were modified by the colonists by their experience in the American environment and emerged as American principles. All right. So go back through your readings and with your notes that you've just taken for this lecture, looking at the environment, the Enlightenment, self-government, economic independence, unification, reference past readings, whether they be lessons, whether they be articles, or they could be past lectures that I've given in class. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. It's just going to be one part in this lecture. Take care.